much to conceal. I'm saying nothing.
So, on the set list for this tour, you include the songs from Porcupine Tree. Do you feel like it's a must that you have to include these songs? Because, you know, there's always people talking to you saying, okay, go back to Porcupine Tree, please do a tour. You already mentioned that for you will be like going backwards because you are doing your own stuff right now. But do you feel like obligated to put these songs on the set?
No, not at all. I mean, I think if I could just sort of correct you one thing there, and I appreciate this is a fine detail, but it's a very important one to me. I don't play any Porcupine Tree songs. I play Stephen Wilson songs.
Right.
Now, I also play a song that was originally recorded by Blackfield in the show right now. I play, I think last night we played 3 songs that were originally recorded by Porcupine Tree. Some nights we play 6 or 7 songs that were originally recorded by Porcupine Tree. But whether they were originally recorded by Blackfield, by Porcupine Tree, or by my solo band, one of my solo bands, to me, that's all secondary relevance. The most important thing is every single one of the songs I play in my show tonight, with the exception of a Prince cover version, but every other song I play in my show tonight was written by Stephen Wilson, and that's all that matters to me. Some people will say, oh, that's a Porcupine Tree song, that's a Stephen Wilson song. Honestly, sometimes I don't even remember myself which is which. There's a song that we were playing, and I honestly couldn't remember whether it was. And you know, that just goes to show you that to me it's not relevant. The point is, I pick songs from my back catalogue, which I want to play, which I think my band can do justice, can do a good version of, and that I think are thematically kind of related. So they make, in other words, they make a nice flow to the show.
Right.
And to me, it's not relevant whether one of those was originally recorded by.
Was always you involved in those music?
Yeah, I mean, it's not relevant to me, and I think it will become less relevant as time goes on.
Right.
And it already is becoming less relevant as time goes on. They're simply songs that I've written. And by the way, they existed before Porcupine Tree recorded them. That I wrote them, and in fact, some of the songs that people think of as Porcupine Tree songs were written for a soundtrack album. A song called Lazarus, for example. Lazarus was written as a solo song for a soundtrack for a movie that never happened anyway. So it ended up being put on a Porcupine Tree record, even though it was only me and a drummer on it. So to me, there's all these things going on in my mind, which I guess are not necessarily relevant to the audience who see the catalogue very much as Porcupine Tree, Blackfield, Stephen Wilson. And that's not the way I guess I see them all as just, these are all my songs I've written. I've written all these songs over the years. And I'd like to do, I like that one, I'd like to do that one. Oh, that's a great one. And I don't necessarily think about, I'm doing a Porcupine Tree song. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, understand. Okay, so in previous interviews you mentioned that you always have some artists that you want to work with in their music, like Kate Bush or Frank Zappa, you want to do something with their music, like, right? I don't know if you heard that they're doing these hologram tours, and they're doing one with Frank Zappa actually this year happening. What do you think of the concept? Will you go to one of those shows if you had the chance?
I don't think so. I mean, you know, listen, it's one of those things where until you actually go along, you can't really say for sure how you'll feel about it. I mean, for example, I'll give you an example. A few months ago, I was invited to see Nick Mason's Sauce Full of Secrets, which is a band, I don't know if you know, it's a band that's put together to play only the kind of early Pink Floyd repertoire, which is probably my favourite era of Pink Floyd, the Sid Barrett and the immediately after. So I wasn't sure how I felt about that. So it's a bit weird, it's like a covers band. And I got dragged along by a friend of mine who works for Pink Floyd, and I loved it. And I loved it, and I loved it without reservation. You know, okay, it is kind of a covers band, but it's a great band, and the repertoire is phenomenal. The songs are great. Sid Barrett's songs are just phenomenal, and they played it well. And so at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter as long as you enjoy it. And I think that's increasingly these days, I think that's an issue and a question that a lot of people ask themselves as the great bands of the 20th century, the great artists of the 20th century, whether it's Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin or you know, or Frank Zappa, are no longer able to play the music themselves, either because they've passed on or because they just don't want to. It's too old, they don't want to do it. And so this whole phenomenon of the covers band, which began back in the 80s, there was an ABBA tribute band, and then there was the Australian Pink Floyd, and for a while they were the only two, and then, but now that whole industry has exploded. Cover bands of everything from Oasis to, you know, to the Carpenters to all this stuff. And that, I think that industry is only going to grow because the original artists are not able to deliver the music, but people still want to experience it in a live context. And so in a way, this loops back slightly to your previous question. Isn't the song actually becoming more important than the artist?
Right.
The repertoire. You know, the Queen repertoire, for example, you know, because by virtue of this new movie, and the same thing happened with the ABBA repertoire, with the Mamma Mia movies and the show. Suddenly, the songs have transcended the artist, and it no longer matters whether you're listening or watching the actual original artist. So ultimately, I think what happens is over a period of years, the repertoire becomes more important.
And the artist itself.
Than what I would call the cult of the personality. And in particularly in a case of a band like Pink Floyd, where their personality was always to the background anyway, it's easy. It's a bit harder when it's Freddie Mercury, he's such a strong personality, how can anyone else play? But I think with Zappa is a great example. Zappa is a great example of an artist that the music is somehow bigger than him.
Right.
Okay, he had quite a strong image, but I think ultimately a group of great musicians could take his compositions and they could play them and they would still sound amazing.
Yeah.
So I have mixed feelings about this. Like a lot of people, I'm kind of very romantic about the brand, you know, so seeing the real people play the music. And I think, again, this comes back to what you're talking about, the Porcupine Tree.
Yeah.
People are very attached to the brand of Porcupine Tree. But actually, honestly, I've been on stage with both of these bands, and my solo band play a lot of those songs much better than Porcupine Tree ever played them. And I can say that because I have no bias either way, you know. Not all of them. Some of them I think Porcupine Tree played better, but some of the songs I wish Porcupine Tree had played them as well as this band does. But people are so attached to the brand of Porcupine Tree that they still would rather see the original. And I understand that because I have that. But I think that's becoming less relevant now as we move into the 21st century. Yeah. Because these original artists are not around anymore. So what are you going to do? Yeah. Go and see a cover band. At least it's better than nothing. Or maybe not. If it's not for you, then don't go.
Totally. So, you know, at this stage, you have 5 albums. Fight to the Bone is the 5th on your solo, right? I noticed that, as you mentioned as well, the promotion on this album was especially heavy. For example, here in Spain, music from To The Bone was played on national radio or television, you know, which wasn't with the Hand Can Be Raised or the previous albums. So was something that you want to push forward just to explore new markets, or it was some decision that was out of your hand?
Well, neither really. I mean, I think what happens is I generally, anyway, every time I make a new record, I'm trying to do something different. And the thing that I did a little bit different with To The Bone record is that I focused a lot more on my songwriting. And so the conceptual rock side of things, it put aside just for one album. I might come back on next time, I don't know. But it was put aside, and I said to myself, okay, I want to focus on just writing great, catchy, more direct material. And because of that, it was easier for the record company to get it on the radio. But it wasn't, I think a lot of people, they kind of say to me, and I'm not sure this is what you're saying, I'm paraphrasing you, but a lot of people say to me, oh, you made To The Bone so that you could get it on the radio. Not really. No. I made To The Bone because I wanted to make an album like that, and then it was easier to get on the radio. But the two don't get the two round the wrong way. So I didn't necessarily expect. I mean, I've been doing this for so long now. I kind of always expect radio and TV to largely ignore me. But it changed a little bit on this record, and I think it was just that the record company found it easier to promote and market concise, catchy, direct songs. And there weren't a lot of those on How Can I Raise.
Yeah.
So I think it's as simple as that. If you've got songs that are easily digestible by people who have no interest in conceptual rock music or metal music, whatever it is, they hear it and say, oh, that's a catchy song.
Yeah.
Then that's easier to get on the radio, and I guess we had some success with that this time.
Right. You know, there's a lot of people that still calls you the king of prog, still target you as a prog artist, even though you say 1,000 times that part of your music you don't consider as prog per se, right? So, To the Bone is an album that is an easier listening to most of the people that are not familiar with prog. Maybe that gets to the market what it gets. So, was also your intention in some sort of way to say, I'm not only a prog artist, I'm doing also To the Bone?
I don't know, because I think that was already self-evident. You know, I mean, I've made many different kinds of record in my career. You know, I have an ambient drone noise project, Bass Communion. I've made pop records with Blackfield. I've made synth pop records with No Man. I've made extreme metal records where they're producing other artists. Yeah. And I never felt particularly that I was someone that was working in a particular genre. In fact, I didn't like the idea of being a generic artist. For whatever reason, I've become known as a progressive rock artist. And listen, I mean, I'm very happy to admit that some of my records are very clearly in that genre.
Right.
So Raven Refused to Sing particularly was almost deliberately designed to be like an old-fashioned progressive rock album. And that was what I wanted to do with that record. To the Bone, I wanted to make more of what you might call an intellectual pop record. So still very sophisticated. Production, arrangements, great musicianship, quite dark lyrical themes, but I wanted to make essentially quite direct, accessible pop songs. It's interesting to me how what people think of as progressive rock has changed anyway. I mean, I see now people talk about bands like Tears for Fears as being progressive. To me, that was just big 80s pop, and I love it. But they talk about, and I think what they recognise now is that there's a degree of sophistication and intellect in that music, which they don't associate with modern pop, which is quite banal. Modern pop music, in the lyrical themes, the way it's delivered, is very banal.
Yeah.
I mean, I like some of it, but it's very banal, it's very simplistic. And when you go back and you listen to Kate Bush records, or Depeche Mode records, or Tears for Fears records, or Talk Talk records, or Peter Gabriel records, you think, well, actually, they're really sophisticated. And isn't that, in a way, what progressive is?
Yeah.
To be appealing to your intellect, as well as your kind of love of a great melody. And the conceptual side of music, telling stories through music, is also, I think, a lot of people now, if they hear somebody telling stories through music, they think, prog rock. It didn't used to be just prog rock, it just used to be a tradition of telling stories through pop music. Now I think there's certain things that people begin to think of as progressive rock that I didn't usually think of as that. So I think the definitions have changed, the kind of the parameters of what can be called. I guess To the Bone is still, for many people, progressive rock, because it's the lyrics are quite dark, and there's storytelling going on, and there's solos, guitar solos, keyboard solos. Some of the songs stretch out to 7, 8, 9 minutes. So I guess to some people that's still considered to be in that genre. But I, again, as the person making the music, I don't think of myself as anything in particular. I just think of myself as a songwriter, someone that makes records, and I want to make every record different to every other record.
So, yesterday I read an interview with Martin Lopez, who was a drummer for Opeth, and now he's on Sowen, Yeah. And he says something like that music must mean something, at least for him, in terms of he cannot identify himself with songs talking about dragons.
Talking about what, sorry?
About dragons, like fantasy,
Dragons,
sci-fi.
Yeah.
Okay, it must be something that he can identify himself in his everyday life.
Right.
Okay, it's something like that to you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I prefer, I've always said that I prefer to talk about inner space rather than outer space, which is a kind of a trivial way of saying the same thing, which is that I think the world that we live in is endlessly fascinating. Sometimes for the wrong reasons, it's because it's fucked up. Everyone seems to have issues and prejudices and agendas and all this stuff. I find that endlessly fascinating without needing to write about, hobbits and dragons and people and things that don't exist. I mean, listen, I'm not patronising. Well, actually, it sounds like I am patronising. I don't mean to patronise that, but that kind of music has never spoken to me. I've never particularly...
He referred to it like shallow entertainment.
I don't know if it's shallow, because sometimes, I know what he's saying, and I don't disagree with it completely, but sometimes I think those people that write those kind of books or make those kind of movies can sometimes use those kind of fantasy worlds as allegories for the world that we live in. I mean, if you think of things like Lord of the Rings and the Alice in Wonderland and the C.S. Lewis books, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, some of them are obviously very clearly allegories for the world that we live in. And I think that can be an interesting way of doing things. But I've always found myself more interested in real life. I've always found myself more interested in writing about relationships and problems, and I've written songs about serial killers, and I've written songs on the new record about the refugee crisis and terrorists. And these are things that I think are all around us every day. Now, there is an argument to say that music should also be a form of escaping from reality.
Yeah.
And there is that kind of music out there too. And there's that, if you want to go and watch Game of Thrones, I've never seen it, but I know it's very popular. I know it's kind of almost an escape from reality.
Right.
And I understand that in this day, people need that.
Yeah.
Because the world is in some ways, such a terrifying prospect to live in this world. To even go out your front door is a terrifying thing. So I understand that there's almost a new appetite for that kind of escapism.
Right.
But that was never what appealed to me. I mean, I grew up I was listening to stuff like Joni Mitchell and Roger Waters' lyrics, and Roger Waters was always writing about how fucked up the human race is. And that, I loved that, that for me appealed. Right.
So talking about how fucked up the world is, something that maybe can be closer to you. We heard a couple of days ago about the decision about Brexit. Right? Artists are starting to talk about the issue. I don't know if you have any thoughts about it, but maybe it could affect music in some sort of way, like touring or distribution.
It's certainly going to affect. It's going to affect touring if it happens. At the moment, honestly, I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea. I mean, I read the news every day and I don't understand what's going on. It may not even happen. I mean, it seems to me there's actually a strong possibility now that it may not even go ahead. So I'm waiting. I'm not trying to prejudge or make any decisions about the future because it simply may not happen. And that would be if it doesn't happen, I think that would be a wonderful thing for most artists. Certainly feel that way. I think if it does go ahead. I mean, I haven't thought a lot about it, but I think it's going to make it very difficult. Just simple things like selling merchandise and T-shirts just to make your. I mean, I survive on that. I spend all the money I make, I spend it on the show. Right. So I have to rely on selling T-shirts. If suddenly I'm going to be taxed heavily on that kind of stuff, just those little things. Start to think, well, you know what? Is it even worth me going on tour, in Europe, and I think that's going to be a really big issue if it happens.
Right.
But let's wait and see.
Well, Steven, just to finish the interview, everybody wants to know if, when you finish this leg of the tour, you are gonna get your mind working 100% on new music, or do you want to stop and just take?
No, I've already started. I mean, I wrote last summer. I wrote 4 or 5 new songs, And I'm going to take a little break when I get back, but probably starting around May, June, middle of the year, I'm starting to record my next record, and it's very different again.
Yeah?
Very different, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
it already has a direction where you want to take it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that's every time I start start writing new songs for a new album, that's the number one question. Where am I going with this? What's the point? You've got to have a point. What's the point of making another record? Right. I'm not going to go and just make a copy of the one I just made or one of the... so I have to, okay, why am I making another record? What am I going to...
Maybe you could change on the process, like if you have 4 songs now and then you do another 4 songs which are totally different from...
That's possible, but I think in my experience what's usually happened is I write about 10 songs quite quickly, 6 or 7 of which I throw them away because it sounds too much like what I did before. And then the 2 or 3 that are left are the ones that get me excited because I'm like, okay, that's a new path. And then that becomes the foundation for the rest of the record. Right. And I'm at that point now. I actually wrote more than 3 or 4. I wrote about 10, but the 3 that I'm happy with are the ones that sound like a way forward.
Right.
And something I can build the rest of the record on. So I'm just at that stage now. So when I get back, I'll go in and I'll use those as a foundation for the rest of the record. And that's what makes me keep making records. I can't go in with the attitude, I'd better do another one like that because the fans like that one, so let's do another one like that. And in a way, that's been my biggest obstacle as an artist over the years, is that I do keep destroying things that people like and doing something different.
Not pleasing the fans.
Yeah, and I think that's the sign ultimately of someone with a long career ahead of them, is that Bowie being the great example of someone that completely changed every record, and now he's seen as arguably the greatest rock solo artist of all time. But that's happened, over a period of years, and disappointing the fans with this record, not making another Ziggy Stardust, not making another Heroes, and all that stuff is hard to do because you're constantly, in a sense, confronting your fans and their expectations. And that comes back to the whole Porcupine Tree thing. I stopped it when I got bored of it and I wanted to do something else. It would have been very easy for me to have turned Porcupine Tree into a career. Yeah. But what a disgusting concept that is, using music as a kind of means to just make a living. It doesn't compute for me.
Yeah.
There's something magical about music, and you have to keep that magic for yourself as well as the audience. So one of the drawbacks of doing that is, of course, is that I remain largely a cult artist.
Right.
Because I haven't necessarily built on what I've done before. I've destroyed it and started something else. And I lose fans. There was a time in the latter days of Porcupine Tree when we had a very strong metal following. I don't think metal fans, a few of them, but I think most of them have drifted away. They realise that's not the kind of music I make. So that's just one example of how regenerating your fan base is it's a tough way to go, but I think for me that's the only way that I could personally